Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our 2024 Rollout webinar for Mastercam. My name is Matt Sump. I'm here today with Alex Zuniga and Matt Cesny, also known as Matt 2.0. And then lastly here, our agenda before I pass it over to Matt. So he's going to cover general design, mill, 2D and 3D. And then when he finishes up, Alex is going to do a little bit more on mill and then cover all the other products like lathe, mill turn.
All right, in case you missed that, again, my name is Matt Cesny. I'm one of the applications engineers here at ShopWare. So what I'm going to jump into right away here is kind of the elephant in the room is this G cube in the lower left corner. As we're used to seeing, if we go to our planes tab, to manipulate through these planes, we'd often have to go to our right-click options, view our top, front, right, different views such as your G views to kind of figure out which plane we are sitting on the model. Now with the enhancement of this G cube, just by simply clicking on one of these views, we'll be orientated where that plane is in relation to our WCS and our CNT planes. Now I can also grab this G cube and manipulate it and have a better understanding of where that plane is originating from. And as well as even clicking on the corners, we get different isometric views. Now going back to clicking on the views and kind of where your CNT planes are going to go to, the rule I have set is to C plane follows G view, T plane follows C plane. This is exactly the default that comes into each version. So by me clicking on, say, the top plane, you're going to see, or the front plane for instance, let me set my WCS there first. It's going to be in relation to that view so that my CNT are going to follow wherever that G cube is set. So some other instances of this G cube is some people might still want to use that dynamic plane creator, which is still used on that G cube itself just by clicking on it. I'm able to still select a plane where I want to put that to pick up a new plane just as we're used to. And if I right click on the G cube itself, you have some other options, such as show cube. I can toggle that on and off if you're not used to or not liking that option there, as well as create dynamic plane. So another quicker way to get to that plane, you just select it. So now 2 ways to do that. Now if I right click on the G cube and go to the settings, we have some additional options here. So one being the size of the cube itself, I can expand that out. And you can make it quite large, as you can see. I'm just going to shorten it down a little bit just to make it a little more apparent. And then we have the size of the cube font itself. You can expand that out in relation to the cube size. Or the entire cube opacity. Do I want it to be, visible or non-visible? If I turn this all the way to 0% and I hit this green check mark, you're going to get a change to your configuration. And I'm just going to say no, so it only applies to this session. So as you can see, it looks like the G cube's not there, but as I hover over it, we get that G cube back. And it's also easier to grab your dynamic plane that way. So I'm going to go back and turn on those views there just so it's easier. And what you're also going to notice is you have these different arrow configuration options. So as before, where we'd use our keyboard with our arrows to manipulate our model, as I'm doing on the screen here, those same options are now with just a click of the button. I can move this up and down, side to side in my X, Y, or basically Z. And if you hover over the arrow itself, you'll see you have different options such as click to pan, alt click to rotate. So if I hold down alt, we're going to get our alt tilt rotations. There's a lot more even options on the rotation command itself. We have click the part for 180, shift click, shift alt click. So I can do some of those here. So clicking one time, we get a full rotation. Shift clicking, shift alt, we get more options as well. So just a better option to view your part, especially for newer users that may not understand or have difficulty manipulating between planes. It's a great enhancement, a lot easier to view your part with. Another thing to mention is there is an enhancement to the zooming in and out on your mouse wheel. So just by zooming in on this model here, you can see if I'm really far away, it's kind of taken me a while to get to that location. Maybe I want to view one of these bores or some intricate detail in this part. Now, this is the old method. Now, if I hold down the shift command and do that scroll mouse wheel, it is about 7 times enhanced the scroll speed. So if I have a bunch of parts, or say I have, huge assemblies on my screen, it's going to be a lot easier to manipulate it, move to that location, zoom in and out, instead of just your standard zooming and scroll speed. Another enhancement we'll see is the translucency options. And for this, I'm actually going to pull up 2023. I'll be bouncing back and forth between the two just to show you the enhancements here. So this is the same file in 2023. And if I turn on the translucency option here and I zoom into this model, there's a lot going on, as you can see. There's just intricate details with the gears, with the bolts, with the housing itself. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on in this assembly if I were, trying to piece this by level. So this same file in 24, we'll see the translucency here. And we can see it's a lot clearer to see with these bigger assemblies, these bigger parts. You can get a better picture of where those bolts are leading to, and all the gears and the housing inside this kind of internal Wankel assembly here. So just a more visually appealing feature. Another enhancement we'll see is if I select these, let's say these two faces right here, and I switch this to, let's say, glass material. Now this isn't a new enhancement, this has been around for a while, but what we will now be able to do is adjust the opacity of this glass material. And that is going to be located in our configuration file. So if I go to my File, Configuration, and I go to this section for shading, we'll now see the glass material here. I can turn that all the way down or keep it 100% as it was. Now if I switch it to 0%, and if I hit this green check mark, it's going to say you're making a change to your configuration file. Hit yes to keep it a permanent, say no to keep it only for this session. So I'm just going to say no here. And as you can see, I can see right through my model a lot clearer. Now it's not going to affect when I select something. I will still have this housing appear as soon as I hover over it. So you're not going to be able to select right through it unless you were trying to grab different auto cursor points or edges of that matter. So this is going to be an enhancement to the design command itself. Something to note here, let me just move this out of the way. In the wireframe tab, we also have brought back the dynamic trim feature. Now this was introduced to us a few versions back, and what this is comprised of all the commands such as your divide, join, modify, trim two entities, and break two pieces. So this isn't a new enhancement. All you have now is those commands just all in this menu all at once. But what we will see is an adjustment to something called the edit spline command. Now, if I was to try to connect these pieces together, such as using a manual spline, there's a lot of options that I'd have to go to kind of manipulate it to be something tangent or something I'd want as a spline. So I wouldn't want to go that route for the spline manual. What I would want to do is something in the right-hand corner of the wireframe tab, we have this edit spline feature. So what this allows me to do is I can select the line I want to modify, and I'm going to turn that off just for this moment here. And you get these points associated with where those splines are created. And what I can do is select an endpoint and use this almost dynamic transform option here to better modify that spline itself. Now this is the old method of manipulating the spline. I'd have to try to find tangency or kind of manipulate it with more manual work. But what we'll see now is if I go back into that edit spline, select that endpoint here, we now have this align end tangencies. And you can kind of see from the picture, it's going to kind of give you a preview and then set it up as a tangent option. So I can grab this gnomon after I select my align tangents, and if I hover over it, it should automatically run that feature tangent. I can hit enter to select a different point. So maybe I want to grab this point here on the bottom, and I just want to hover that over to this feature. As you can see, it's set to relax, so it's going to relax the model. If I set it to preserve, it'll keep that shape, and now I can bring it up to here, and now we have a nice tangent spline. I'm going to get into some more design enhancements, and for this what I'm going to be doing is jumping back between 23 and 24 to show you the differences. Now when I open this, it's just letting me know that the font might not be in Mastercam, could be for an older version or just not downloaded on this computer. So I'm just going to say green check, and I'm going to be okay. I'm also going to pull this up in 23 to show you the old way first and then our new way. What I'm also going to do is just make it a little bit more. So we have this file here, and what we'll first see is an enhancement to the drafting tab itself. If I were to put a note here on this part, and maybe I want these holes to have a call out on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, just write a comment, holes normal to surface. So I'm going to leave my text here, and what I want is a leader line associated with this note. So all these holes right here. So what I can do to that is go to the Advanced tab, and I have my Add Leaders here. So all I'd have to do is click Add and select my leaders. Now I can't keep clicking. What I have to do is go back manually and click the Add each time I want to add that. So this can kind of be a tedious process, and we'll see an enhancement to this in 24. But as you can see, I'm clicking on those holes right there, and to delete those, I have to manually click Delete, select that location, and go about that leader process. Not to mention, if I were to move this leader note altogether, notice there's no live update to where those leaders are. I have to wait till I drop it off in order to see the end result. So I'm going to green check out of there. And if I do that same process in 24, and I go to the drafting tab, and I'll select my notes, and I'll write that same comment, holes normal to surface. If I go to the Advanced tab to where those leaders are, and I click Add and select those holes, you'll notice I won't have to go back to the Add feature. I can just keep clicking as many holes as I want to select. And instead of clicking the Delete command while you're in that Add feature, hitting Escape one time, or as many times as you want, will delete those leaders, and then I can just re-click all the ones I want to select. With this, you'll also notice after I hit the Enter command to solidify that, I can grab this holes normal to surface, and it's going to live update where those arrows are. So I don't have to wait for myself to drop it off to give myself some live feedback. There's another drafting enhancement, and I'm going to go back to 23 to display that here. If I select, say, the Smart Dimension, and I want to grab this length of maybe this diameter to this diameter here, what I'm going to want to do to this is maybe I want to make an enhancement to where these arrows are or how these arrows are depicted. And if I go to the Advanced tab, we have this Options command down here. And if I select that, we get this kind of old, more so outdated options to view where those leaders are going. And if I go down to the leaders/witnesses, here's where I have my arrow adjustment selection method. So if I wanted to make some changes to this and maybe adjusted this arrow length and set the style to say triangle, you'll notice when I make these adjustments and I hit this green check mark, there is a prompt that's saying this is going to be a change to your configuration. So what this means is if I tried to bring this to another coworker or customer, this is going to involve a configuration change which may not be changed on their computer. So we're altering the configuration file at this point. And I'm going to say no because I don't want to save these permanently just for this session. And we'll get that display right there. Now we didn't get a preview or a live update of what that is. We'd have to go back into the options, change the configuration, and go from there. Within 24, if I click on the Smart Dimension, and I repeat that process, we get this different machine, almost like a machine group setup page that we saw last year, but a different enhancement user interface to the drafting tab itself. I now have these different tabs here, and if I scroll down to the leaders and witness lines, we now have the ability to adjust it right from this page. So I can change those, and I'm going to get a live update of those width and the height. And if I switch this style to triangle, we get a live update as well. Now, when I hit the green check mark, you're also going to notice there's no change to the configuration file itself. It's just live update, so I can go back and change as many times as I want, and I don't have to worry about going to another coworker's computer and them having different configuration settings that are not needed. I'm going to talk about some solid hole enhancements here. So in 2024, we are now going to see edge treatments, reversing hole direction, and exploding hole operations all together. So if I go to the solids tab here, and I have some history of my part itself, I got some holes, and let's give a scenario and say there was a change to a engineering design, and we needed some chamfers on the top of these two legs here. So what I'd have to do is I need to make sure I have some solid history, and I see this simple 157 diameter hole right here, which has that history associated with it. So what I can do is I can go into that option, and I now will see the history, all those holes selected, and I see down here we have top and bottom edge treatments available to us. So if I want some top edge treatment, I can just select that feature, and I can set this chamfer distance here to a 50th thou chamfer with that diameter at that angle. And you're going to see there's no chamfer displayed here. So if I rotate the model up, I should see the chamfers at the bottom. This will allow me to use the reverse hole option at the top of that page, reverse hole. So if I select that, the chamfers are going to be displayed at the top where those legs are, and I can kind of go about my day. If I green check, what you're going to see is this simple 157 hole that we edited has a nice X on it. So what this is telling me is I need to regenerate this model so that I can check to make sure it's still good. So I can come up and just say regenerate. Now I see those holes displayed as I'd want them depicted. Now let's say another instance, maybe we wanted this individual hole itself to maybe have a dowel pin instead of a nice chamfer to have a different call out for some dimensioning notes. So if I wanted to change just that singular hole, with what I have right now is this simple 157, all these holes are selected. I'd have to make new holes individually, but now in 24 I can right click and say explode hole operation. And you're going to see that list just drops down automatically, and I can toggle through these holes here until I find the one I want to change, and I can simply double click on that simple 157 hole, and I can turn off the top edge treatment itself. Then I can green check my way out. And again, we changed the solid, so we just need to regenerate the model. And we'll see we get that nice single simple drilled hole. Now, when it comes to edge treatment, there are some specific cases, such as the countersinks cannot use edge treatment, and if you have a taper hole, you cannot define the bottom of that edge with the diameter used as the dimensioning method. So some other specific cases is where I will show you this right here. And I'm going to open up 23 to show you the old method and 24 for the new method. I just have this step file right here. I'm just getting it open for both of those. Now, if I go to the solids tab and I create a hole, what I'm going to do is just select my plane and get this set up to where I can just put some nice points on this model. And it looks fine now, but if I rotate the plane on where those are sitting, we can see the issue from perpendicular view from where that ramp location is. We're getting basically a cut hole, it's half a hole, not really our desired outcome. If I switch this to a counterbore itself, it's a pretty hard part to machine if you ask me. So these are kind of the options you may have seen in 23. Now in 24, if I do that same process, I'll select my points. No change yet, but when I switch the plane itself, we see a nice perpendicular hole. It's giving us all the features, and if I switch it to a counterbore, we get a nice counterbored hole, compared to 23 where we see all the cutoff features. So some enhancements definitely have been made to that solid hole. All right, so we have this part here, and the first thing I want to do is I'm going to drill a nice simple drill hole for all these yellow areas where that hole is. So I'm going to go into my drill command, and I'm going to use the solid history or the solid hole itself, and I'm going to hold down my control click option so that it's going to select all the alike holes that I see right there. You'll also see in 24 we get a hole counter now, so it's going to call out 4 holes as selected. What I don't like is the sort order, so what I'm going to do is change that. I'll say point to point and click my starting location. We now will see a nice 4 holes with the shortest path. I'm going to hit the green check mark, and I'll go into my tool page and select this 8.5 millimeter drill, drill counter bore, 3-axis, and in my linking parameters, this is going to be where the major change is, as we can see right here. We now will have graphical planes displayed for these critical depths. I'm just making it so you guys can see it a little better here off to the side. Also notice we get immediate feedback if I try to change these. So for instance, this 0.5 retract, if I said 0.1 and hit enter, we're now going to get immediate feedback on where that is in reference to our depth and our top of stock locations. I can also grab the physical plane itself and move it on this ruler or to an edge point, such as maybe the top of this bored hole right here. Again, I can type in those values for that live feedback, get the updated of those planes itself. They're color coordinated to differentiate the different critical depths. What I can also do is individually toggle these displays on and off if I didn't want to see them, or you have at the top corner here to toggle the display graphical elements page itself, so I can uncheck that in case I didn't want to see those all together. Another option we have is if I turn on the clearance, I'll get a nice display of an incremental of where those heights are in relation to my top of stock. Or I can switch this to an absolute, which covers the entire plane of that part in reference to where the crosshairs are. So what I can do with this, I can grab this plane, I can move it up and down, I can snap it to the top of this part here, and once I know that's the very top, I can type in another maybe an inch just for safety and have that nice clearance height. We'll also, if I zoom into this part, we see that it is a through hole. So we're going to also see the enhancement of the tip compensation being on the same page as our linking parameters. So no more will it be in another submenu or you have to click the plus sign next to the linking parameters, or say in general you forget to turn it off. It's going to be right here, so you should be able to see it a lot clearer. So if I activate that tip comp, I also get another critical depth associated with that. And I can type in maybe a breakthrough of 50 thou, hit enter, and I get a nice updated feedback of where that's breaking in with all my clearance, top of stock, retracts, depth, and tip comp. So if I hit the green check here, and I backplot it, folder, you can see it's breaking through down to the part, going to our clearance height, retract height, and respecting those linking parameters. Now what if we wanted to do maybe a 5-axis drill pattern, and I wanted to grab the holes on this lower radar mount bracket location? I'm going to grab my drill, zoom into the hole and use that control click option for the solids. I get a nice sort order with just one click. I have a hole counter of 14. Hit the green check mark and go into my tool page. I'm just going to grab a 5.6 millimeter drill here. I'm going to switch the tool axis to 5-axis output. And when I go to my linking parameters page now, you get those critical heights associated with that 5-axis motion that's going to be taking place. So for the clearance, maybe I didn't want it to go all the way up to this height. Maybe I shortened it to, let's say, 2 inches. And maybe I wanted the only start and end of display so that I can only see the drill entering from that location at the beginning and end. My breakthrough here, if I turn on my translucency, we can see it's a blind hole, so I can switch this tip compensation to 0 so that it's flush with the diameter of the drill on the diameter of the part. Maybe I shorten my retract to 0.1, so we get a nice immediate feedback of those relations. And I'll hit the green check mark. So if I backplot it, as you can see, respecting those depths, 0.1 retract, so very nice feature. Teaching in the classroom here at the Elgin office, I do find that the linking parameters to be kind of a difficult concept to understand, especially with the incremental and absolute values. So I've been teaching this class and already seen some improvement with the understanding of kind of how these different heights play out. I'm going to move on to another file here. All right, so with this model here, we're going to now be able to manipulate chains within the geometry page itself. So I'll give you a little example here. If I go to the contour toolpath, and I'll keep it on wireframe chaining, and I select a climb cutting direction on these bores here, but maybe on one instance I overlook it and I get a wrong chain direction, and I continue on and grab that chain direction that way. So I'll green check through here, and then I'll go ahead and fill out my parameters. I'll just use this full end mill. I'm going to leave the leads and basically everything alone, just standard as is, and I'm going to hit the green check mark. So as you can see, 3 out of those 4 are correct. If I turn on my simple verify here, I can see going through that location, and then we're crashing on that other chain. Now, if we go to the geometry page, we only have 4 chains right now, but if we had, say, 30, 40, 50, it can kind of be a daunting task to go through these chain managers and find which chain is the wrong direction or which one's highlighting, and then I'd have to right-click and reverse the chain itself. Within 2024, just by seeing which chain is wrong, I can double-click the arrow to change the direction of that chain itself. So I no longer have to sift through this list, right-click, and try to find those options. So now if I green check out, and just a simple regenerate, I get that nice chain climb cutting into the part, simple fix, and I can carry on my way. Let's say we had more chains, such as this area mill option right here. If I went into the geometry, and the selected is going to be this automatic regions here. So instead of trying to sift through this list here, just by clicking on that arrow, it's also going to highlight those regions. So I can just double click to change the direction. I can change the compensation itself, and I have more control over that adjustment. So nice enhancement there. We'll definitely be using that a lot. Now, just another note, this does also work for any chaining in Mastercam, such as solid chaining, lathe, mill turn, router. You're going to have that enhancement at your disposal. The next file I'm going to talk about is the machine group setup enhancements. If I click on the files option, we're going to notice as of last year we got this total revamp of the machine group setup page we were introduced to certain features like the master model, which is used to select the solid to ensure you have the correct finished part for any simulating, as well as the fixtures option, which was displayed with us, where we can bring in from a different level, from a different file. You'll notice there's a toggle on feature that I can now keep off. But these two, master model and work holding, were not something you needed to do. They were just other options thrown up front to you. If I go into the stock setup page itself, you're going to see some different or added options, such as the add from 2 points, rectangular stock, and cylindrical stock. Now, the add from 2 points was in previous versions, and we had a lot of requests to bring it back, so we will now see that in 2024. For those that haven't seen how the add from 2 points works, if I get a nice bounding box of my part, I can use this add from 2 corners. And what this allows me to do is pick a top point of my model and a lower point on my model to basically create a boundary of stock width. So if I select this corner, get this almost wireframe looking option, and I can hover right to the lower one, and it's going to pick up on those stock values. So if I right click and remove that, I can show some other options of the creating the stock. So for the rectangular, I can select this model, and you can fill out the length, width, and height yourself, such as the 150, and maybe those other options there. So I can type in those manually, or if I select that stock again, I can utilize the push-pull features here. So just by selecting a face on that model, I can grab this arrow and snap it to a point on the bounding box, or maybe I wanted to do it at the same time. I have this both directions icon. So I can grab a face, and now it's going to pull that stock symmetrically, and I can fill in my remaining entities. So if I wanted more on one side, I can adjust that accordingly. So another thing to mention is when I go to the files and I go to the simulator options page here, you're going to see your simulation, which you can choose from, which I will show you in another model, as well as this new stock override, where I can choose between stock models to choose from, such as my stock setup or this roughed out stock. So I can choose to toggle that on or off when displaying my solid stock models. I'm going to open up this same file, but I'm going to use a different method to show you the different stock models I'm talking about. So we have this part here, and I have it on a horizontal for this example. And what we're going to see is in my stock setup page, we have this solid as the stock setup. And if I select these options, you'll notice I have two different stock models. I have this one, and then I have the roughed out stock itself. So if I click on these three, and I go straight into my verify, it's going to ask me, do you want to select all your operations? I'm going to say no. I'm just going to give it a second to use the machine simulation. So the machine simulation is a separate purchase. I'm displaying here that I can utilize a horizontal. Say I had one in my shop, I wanted it more realistic looking. I can utilize this machine simulation feature. This is going to be different than the standard verify where you're limited to what you can see, but you can get your exact machine replicated into this example here. So if I just hit the play button, and run through this part, we'll see it's removing the stock. It's just doing a nice OptiRough. Speed it up a little bit here. And we have our roughed out part. Now, in previous versions, such as 23 and before, we'd have to go into this simulator options page to pick where we want our different stock model. Now, if I go into the simulator options page in 24, it's going to take you to the machine group setup simulation page. Now I have this rough stock override, which I'm going to turn off. This is where you can choose which stock model you want to appear. And if I turn that off, and you're also going to notice I have my Moxim, this Okuma MB5000H. The enhancement in 24 is, instead of selecting through the simulator options, I can go right from the toolpath manager itself. So if I select the stock model followed by the toolpath, I can jump straight into verify from here. So I'm going to say no because I don't want to save that. And what should take place is my roughed out stock from this position. And if I hit the play, I should see these helical bore toolpaths. So it may not be a big deal right now, but if you had 30 stock models and you're doing a lot of 3D movement, definitely can come in handy just by clicking on that stock model followed by the toolpath. Something to note, you do not want to have a toolpath selected first, followed by your stock model and then your other toolpath. So if I had this toolpath, stock model, and another toolpath, what it's going to do is resort back to my stock setup. So if I went into verify, you'll see right here, it's resorting to that stock setup. So just by ensuring you have your stock model followed by your toolpath is all you need to bring it straight into verify. In case you're wondering about this big red stock display, I just have to toggle that off and on to get rid of that. Now, what we're going to see is two different dynamic toolpaths, but there is an enhancement to this. If I go into the parameters, we're using a 1/2 inch flat, and I go to my cut parameters. Now, dynamic mill is a really popular toolpath, and this was actually brought by feedback from you, the customer. They wanted different options to produce more nominal chips and minimize smaller chips, and this does so by something called this maximize engagement. So what this will allow me to do is move to a desired step over a lot quicker. So it's disabled by default. It won't be on when you open up a dynamic toolpath. And if I display, let's say, the start of this toolpath here with maximize engagement off, I'm going to turn on my simple verify and just remove the holder for better visualization. And using dynamic, we can see it often takes a while to gradually reach the step over we have desired. So here it's a gradual jump into the part. Now, if you're cutting harder material, this is still a safe and good way to go. But if you're cutting softer material and you can afford to be more aggressive with your cut, we'll see in this second toolpath we have the maximize engagement turned on. And if I backplot that, we'll see almost immediately we are reaching that step over of that call out in our cut parameters. So some other areas that this affects for better enhancements is sections along here. So in the first toolpath, we get this first section here with this, what could perform as maybe a small cusp here. So if I run through the other pass at this, with the maximize engagement turned off, notice that it's not clearing that wall. There may be some burrs left over, as well as it's almost on center line with the cut. It really hasn't moved over that much. So chances are you're going to need another toolpath to finish this or deburr it by hand. Now with that maximize engagement, you're going to see a different format of that tool. It'll run through there, leave that cusp, but the next toolpath that comes by, you're going to see the more spaced out step over, as well as the section where that cusp would have been is completely removed. So no need for, different tool paths. It's just more aggressive with a cut. Can move over to that step over a lot quicker. As well as this island cleanup for the maximize engagement turned off. We get this more motion as it's trailing back here. It does this more swirly pattern, more tool movement. Whereas if I turn on the max engagement, just takes one trip to get around that part. Not to mention the overall step over pattern you see with the max engagement turned off. As with it on, it's a lot cleaner form of programming. In the next enhancement, I'm going to jump over to our area mill toolpath. So some of the enhancements we're going to see with this area mill toolpath, and I'm just going to create a toolpath here. So I go to the area mill. What I'm going to use, instead of choosing the machining region and selecting the avoidance and air regions, I'm going to use this automatic regions, which was introduced to us a few versions back. But what this allows me to do is select any flat areas, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's going to populate that chain for me. So I'm just grabbing all the flat faces on this part. And I have these fins here, and what I do want to do is avoid those. So I can come over to this boundary. I'm going to select the wireframe here. So we got the full closed chain. And in my tool, just grab my 3/8 cutter. I'm just going to say we're finishing this surface. Give it some different parameters. Now the stock model we're using is about 20 thou, so I'm just going to say 25 thou incrementally from that. Myself a nice clearance of 2 inches. And I'll just hit the green check mark. So as you can see, we get a lot of retract moves and a lot of rapids. If I copy this tool path, in our cut parameters itself, we now have closed contour direction and open contour direction. So for any open contours, maybe I want to switch that motion to zigzag. If I green check out of there, we'll now see a lot less rapid motion when we're machining this part. Now, if you have harder material, it still may be necessary to climb one way, but if you can afford with softer material or aluminum, can definitely speed up that process, especially with the automatic chaining. Another enhancement we'll see is within our high-speed leads itself. Before, we were only used to seeing the vertical arc entry and exit. Now we have horizontal arc entry, exit, ramp angle, sweep, a lot more control of those leads. So if I said maybe a horizontal arc of 250 and a sweep of 60, each where it enters the part is going to have a nice horizontal lead associated with it. Coming into that part, cutting that motion from there. I'm going to move on to some 3D work here. So what I have here is this part with a few different toolpaths on it. Now what I'm going to do is turn on this section view so we can better see what's going on. So in the area rough toolpath itself, there has been an enhancement to the critical depths, which is an option that has been added. So right now we have a step down of 200 thou. It's maintaining that with our geometry being the entire part, as we can see right here. And if I backplot through this part, notice it's going to step down, and it's right in that Z corner. You can see that 200 thou and a few 2/10. That's just my tolerance, those extra 2 thou or 2/10. And it's going to step down completely 200 thou and maintaining that all the way down. Now, what does this look like? Well, I have a stock model associated with that. So we can see there's a lot of heights it's missing. It's just respecting those 200 thou values, but it's not really cleaning up any of these other flat sections I have here. So with the critical depths now on in the second one, I have the option to include flats. So anywhere it sees a flat, it's going to machine it. So if I backplot this, you're going to see the first height it drops down to is this 177 thou and 2/10. And what it's picking up on is this flat right here. So this really thin wall that maybe I don't need a step down for on this toolpath, but it is going to machine it and step down the rest of the way until it touches off all those flats. And what that stock model looks like is right here. So no area is not touched with that end mill. Now the problem with this is you're getting a lot more step downs, and you no longer follow the step down rule of that 200 thou. You also might be taking step downs you really don't need, as well as, not to mention, the bottom edge on your tool is going to be more weared than the rest of the flute. So a nice enhancement to that critical depths here is this include manual. So if I remove these points and I select where I want to pick, let's say I wanted this surface and this surface, I can click a little edge point on the face of that part, as well as down here. And by clicking the end selection and green checking, I'm going to regenerate this model. And we see exactly those locations we basically picked and pointed are going to be the areas to cut. So this surface and this surface. And I can add as many features as I want to cut those areas, but it's a nice feature if you just want to be able to quickly pick where those features you want to cut are. Is going to be an enhancement to the linking parameters itself. So I'm using this hybrid toolpath here, and you can see those of you that have taken the class here at the Elgin office, this is a very familiar part. But we have this machining surface here, and cut parameters, we'll leave those alone. Now in the linking parameters, we saw this revamp a few versions back with a lot more options to customize our leads in and out, and we have secondary leads as an option. But right now we have a vertical entry and a horizontal exit. So anywhere you see a green is that vertical entry. And if I go to the first lead, you can see I'm entering the cut. And we get these horizontal lead outs where it needs to lift up and over. Now, the issue with this is this first, or this very last lead right here. We have a horizontal exit for this location. But if I skip to the end here, what we're going to see is as that part leads out, it's a straight motion going out, which is not what I wanted. I wanted a horizontal lead out. So since this is happening as the very last lead, if I changed any of these parameters, it's going to possibly affect the other leads and lead outs that I've already set, which I might not want to change. What we will now see is under the linking parameters page, we have a first last lead section. What I can now do is write a rule basically for only the first lead and only the last lead. So for this lead out section, maybe I want to change that to a vertical exit, and I'll just keep that distance 5 and 5, and I'm leaving everything else alone. And as you can see, we still have the horizontal lead here, but we get a nice vertical exit on that last lead. skip to the end there and just reverse it really quick, you can see that vertical exit. So you can use these in a lot of different ways, such as keeping maybe you have a really critical part that you want to see only the first pass be a safe distance away, but not the rest of the leads. You can utilize that, as well as maybe semi-finishing with some conservative lead-ins for varying stock amounts, as well as in the page itself, you have options to alter the feed rate right from this section instead of maybe doing it at the machine. So it's a lot quicker method to just get right on the shop and continue running your parts. With that being said, that is all I have for this file.
Morning, everyone. My name is Alex Zuniga, and I'm going to go ahead and get started on this rest of this webinar here. We're going to be covering a little bit more 2D milling stuff, some 3D, and then go right into multi-axis and turning towards the end. So let's get started. So the first file I got here is our new feature that we call Process Hole. This is a really neat feature. It has a lot of good ups to it. You have to have solid history assigned to the holes in order for it to work. So the way it works is you go ahead and grab this Process Hole toolpath, and you select the geometry you're looking for. And this will use a reference file that has different hole callouts associated to it. So anytime you have a hole callout for a particular size, it'll recognize that and give you the operations that are available for that hole size that you made in that custom file. So you can see here I just set up some clearance heights. I didn't really mess with anything other than making sure I have the correct operation picked. And then when I'm done with it, you can see right off the bat I have several operations done. So this is the spot drill there, and then the actual drilling op going through the rest of the file there. This also works in a 5-axis motion. So even if you're using the process hole on different types of surfaces, it is feasible to use even on 5-axis. So you can get all of that in there. And just like the other one that I made in here, you see you pick the holes. And this particular hole is a 1/4 inch. And on my library that I made, I have several holes that are available, hole styles. So there's a 1/4 inch style and a 1/4 20 tap style. Right? And just to give you an example of how that looks, the library that it's referencing is this guy here. So I took the time here, I made this whole section here for different style of holes. Got some inch, got some metric. You can see with this metric blind or metric through, I have this 4mm group here, right? Whereas in the inch, I have 2 sets of groups that are associated to the same 1/4 20 or the 1/4 inch hole. So that's why I was able to see more operations. So if I took the time and made all the different type of operations I like to make, I can keep this template file stocked with every kind of hole operation that I could possibly want to use. So that's a little bit about the process hole. It's a little bit of work up front just putting all these holes together, but once you get it all set, it'll always work for you and to your advantage. Is on our 3D side. So in 2023 and below, a lot of the toolpaths like equal scallop, you had to mess with arc filter tolerances in order to get a finer finish on certain types of paths. You can see here with this particular toolpath, it is collapsing the pattern based off the overall shape, which is the rectangle you see on the outside. In 2020, we were able to include a shape to drive the toolpath in it. So now we have this circle here that is driving the shape of the motion associated to all the surfaces. The problem with this is if you zoom in close enough, you can see there's a lot of gap spacing here on this toolpath. It's actually, linearized. Even if I have the arc filter set pretty high. I even got smoothing settings on here. So the only way that we could have potentially made this better is to go into our configuration and up the tolerances and the main system tolerance. So that is now no longer needed in 2024, where we are able to use just regenerating the toolpath. We have ourselves a nice smooth looking toolpath here. You can see it's not compared to the original here. Another feature that is new in the equal scallop toolpath is, like I said before, we have a drive curve that is working for this toolpath here. That's why we have this circular motion. In 2024, we now have the ability to use points, whereas before we couldn't use a point. So we had to just use a really, really small circle to achieve the same motion. So this is with a point. You can see that it's very similar, but now we don't need to have an actual circle there to drive that. Another feature that's neat in 2024 is inside of the toolpaths for the spiral toolpath option inside of Blend, the way the toolpath would behave, the first pass would always not overlap the area here. So you would get this constant walk around. You can see here there's a huge gap right here. And if I open up the stock model here, you can see it leaves that swirl right there. So now in 2024, all I have to do is just regenerate the toolpath, and Mastercam will close out that gap on the first pass there for a spiral option inside of Blend. So you can see now the toolpath closes out on the first pass, and then it continues on. So if I regenerate the stock model, you can see it's a cleaner circle there. So that's a new enhancement with the Blend toolpath there. Waterline has a few features that are new in 2024. So when you have a stock model associated to a toolpath, previous toolpaths, in older versions, Waterline used to only cut all the way through. It didn't look at that actual stock model. So now when I go into the stock page of a Waterline toolpath, I have the ability to choose from a previous operation and to detect the breakthrough of stock. So just turning on that feature, you can see it eliminates a lot of those extra passes that were happening in the beginning here. Another feature in the Waterline, we used to have add cuts, and it worked really well, because what happens here without it is you can see there's a stretch going on the beginning of this radius here, where you're not getting any cutting motion. The step downs are even, so they're cutting where they're meant to be spaced, but just not right where it needs to be making contact. So in previous versions, we had our add cuts button that we would turn on and add the amount of step down that we would want for it. Well, the problem with this is it would clean it up, you would get those passes, but then you get a lot of crunching going on, as you can see here. You know, I like to call this like an accordion effect. Those add cuts go around the entirety of the part here. So in 2024, we have a new button that is called Allow Partial Cuts. This will eliminate the crunching in the areas that is not necessary to be had. As you can see here, this is the new result. We have all these little add cuts here, lead-ins and lead-outs where they need to be, and there's no more crunching going on right over here. The last portion of the 3D enhancements is going to be pencil. So back in the day with pencil, we were not able to pick avoidance regions. So if we only pick the specific style and specific area to cut in with pencil, we were at the mercy of how it behaved. So as you can see here, the area I'm trying to cut is this section right here. And you can see this face here is a selected surface if I go into the parameters. So that's what I'm trying to cut. Now it has no clue that the undercut area here in this portion of the bracket is there. It just recognizes those surfaces. So now you start to get cuts that are cutting through the part, as you can see. And then I finally get some sort of a motion that I'm looking for in this section. So before, I used to have to create a containment of this specific shape just to make sure that it does not go into the areas that I need it, or split the faces, do some sort of model prepping for pencil. Well, now we have the ability to use avoidance regions. So all I have to do is just right click in here and say add remaining entities and hit the green check mark. And now I have a nice recognized toolpath. Very simple but very effective change for the pencil toolpath. Some of the features in here can be applied for both 3-axis milling and 5-axis as well, but it's really easy to show it off under the 5-axis capability, considering Unified has a lot of options available in it. You can see here under this number 3 toolpath here, I have this nice morph toolpath. I really like the way that looks, and I want that to apply with the same settings that I have here to affect inside of this area. You can see when I go into the toolpath, under the cut pattern, I have the morph option selected. I have my tool axis control set with a specific side tilt angle. I have some collision control. I've currently saved this into a toolpath default, which is the new feature available in here. So if I make a new unified toolpath, back in the day we used to have to go ahead and export a toolpath manually from an operation library or from a previously made file. Well, now all of this is at the corner here inside of the toolpath itself. I have the ability to click on this open button here for this load toolpath defaults, choose my library, which I have selected here that I made, and now I have the list of all the unified styles that I've currently made inside of this particular operation library. So the one I want to use is this new morph. So when I grab what I need in this list, I can hit the green check mark, and I have this drop down menu that has all those different styles in here now. So when I click on the new morph, I'm not going to close this. Now when I go to cut pattern, you can see it's all loaded up in here. I have all the options that I needed for that. In this case, I really don't need this check surface because I don't have any floor to deal with. So I can just turn that off altogether. But at this point, now I don't have to worry about doing anything other than picking the geometry I plan to use. So I'm going to pick my curves. And I'll pick my surfaces. And knowing that my defaults are set the way I want it to for that particular style, I can just hit the green check mark and I'm ready to roll. So if you have a usual set of operation styles that you like, you can set them and use them as necessary. That looks pretty good. So if I wanted to save that default now to that library, because this one here had a collision control by default, which I didn't need on this particular style. So if I wanted to now, I can just click the save button here, choose a library, either open one or use the default library, And then I can hit the plus sign and name it to something that I want. So maybe I'll name it Morph Open-Ended. And hit OK. So the next time I hit the drop-down menu, there it is, ready to roll. So this is really nice when you don't have to worry about sifting through all the different type of operations that you might have made in the past. It's right at the fingertip in this list here. Hanging on to the same file, some of the new features inside of a lot of our toolpaths in the 5-axis suite. We have a lot of color coordination now that is available in here. As you can see, when I did this morph, I have the blue and the yellow lines here. They are associated to the color of this, in this color palette that I've selected right here. So every curve has its own color. Every surface has its own color for machining surfaces. As I was saying, in the collision control area, you can see I have the red surfaces here marked as, avoidance. So we have the ability to color coordinate them, and I can select what colors I actually want to see. So I only want to see the options that I've selected within this menu area here. So if I turn that on, you can see the green machining geometries from the previous menu are hidden now. So if I go back to my cut pattern page, you can see the green and not the red. So you have the ability to switch that on and off so you can see everything or just one thing at a time. A new enhancement we have on deburr is the ability to select, to walk off of the actual tip of the tool. So if you watch this particular toolpath, you can see here, it's walking right on top of that tip. So that's the weakest point of the ball typically, and that doesn't help out with the overall finish. So a lot of times people will make tilt lines or just different limits to allow it to not walk on that center area. Well, it's a little easier to do now in 2024, where all I have to do is go into my tool axis control and select avoid contact for the point on the tip. And that'll simply just walk it off over to the other side. You can see here when I'm backplotting this, I'm no longer making contact with that tip. It's just utilizing any other portion based off of the limits I gave it to walk around. On the last release of Mastercam, we had the ability to use the flank and taper of a tool. And those were basically set to only be able to be used on ball, flat end mills, and taper end mills, and lollipop. Now we have the ability to use on other type of flat end mills. You can use bullnose end mills, you can use dovetail cutters, anything of that nature that has some sort of a flank, taper, or tip. You have the ability now to switch between tip and flank. In Unified, we have the planar option for creating toolpaths, and you can see one of the new features in here inside of that plane option under the cut pattern is to use custom angles. So before custom angles, we used to have to pick this pattern based off of a WCSZ, an XY, or particular construction plane, and that would align the toolpath to match that particular set of plane angles that were set there. Well, now with the custom angles, I have the ability to go and pick those particular angles. So I can set an exact angle that I'd like it to be. As you can see here, we have this set to wherever this green line is, and that's where the toolpath is following with. So if I change this number here from, whatever that crazy 8 degree is to something like 20, and I hit the green check mark, you can see I am now following a 20-degree range. So you can set up any kind of custom angle you like. And now you will be able to follow that particular pattern. Really nice feature. Another unified enhancement in previous versions, we had the ability to use this new version, this new type of style called guide. So you would pick a guide curve, like we have this here, and it would create the pattern based off of that curve. Well, you can see it's wrapping around here. If I look at this, you can see it's wrapping around right here. So you'd either have to make the curve longer, or create a different curve that straightens out, so that way it doesn't wrap around in that sense. You can also see that it's walking over, lifting up and over between these holes here. In 2024, we introduced this straighten cuts on boundaries. So this will straighten out that thought process in that curve that was picked and extend it basically to infinity. It automatically also checks in the feature that was placed in last year called filled holes. So with that checked, you can see we are completely walking over the holes as if we model prepped it, which eliminates a step there, right? Typically, in older versions, we used to model prep and get rid of this particular slot here and this hole here, so that way the tool can walk right across it without any issue. But now with that turned on, you can see it's just fine. And then you can also see the curves are walking constant with it. So there's no actual wrapping around that particular drive curve there that we have picked. So a lot nicer, cleaner looking toolpath. Blade Expert is a fantastic toolpath when you're dealing with anything of this nature here. A lot of different twists and turns in this impeller here. As you can see though, it has its limitation. We've limited the tool axis control to behave under specific tilt strategies. So when you give it that option in here, it's limited by where it can reach. As you can see, it's not able to make it down here. So when we look at that particular area, you can see it's not making it down there, and it's also going to probably potentially hit right around there. So maybe we want to be able to get in there. We know we can fit in there without actually overworking the machine. So the new checkbox that exists inside of 2024 is this use full collision check. So this will override this thought process in here to help allow the motion to behave better. So just with one checkbox, it takes a little longer to load, but you get a much cleaner, more efficient looking toolpath. So if I backplot to that same spot, the rest of this beginning section had no problem in there. But now when I look at this spot here, you can see I'm clearly staying away from that area. Real close. But no problem there. Tip of the tool's doing what it needs to do. Very nice. So that's a nice addition to Blade Expert for those of you that use it. That checkbox there. For an already easy to use toolpath, that checkbox makes it that much easier. The last enhancement for 5-axis is just another type of option that you could potentially use. So this is going to be kind of the best of both worlds when it comes to roughing. So typically when you rough out a pocket in 3-axis motion, you can use the good old-fashioned OptiRough here. Great toolpath. I love it. I use it as much as I can. You can see here with the stock model of that OptiRough, we got a lot of scallops here, so we're going to have to do some rest roughing. Get another tool in, clean it up, make it a little smoother before we do any kind of finishing. Well, now we have our other option here, which is the 5-axis pocketing that was introduced a couple years ago. And the motion behaves really nice. It still does that dynamic motion in 5-axis, so it's roughing it in that 5-axis motion. So this is staying normal to all the faces as it's going. Once it gets to the bottom, you can see it cleans up. I'm just going to kind of fast forward to about right there and trim off the toolpath. When we're about here, you can see the tool is cleaning up those scallops that would be there if we were to use OptiRough. So this is cleaning that area up in that section. So that helps clean everything up way more efficiently to be able to use for a finishing toolpath. So it'll look something like this. So it's a lot smoother, a lot more ready to be used for a finishing toolpath. Now, the downside to this one is that you have a lot of motion. As you saw in the back plot, it was going pretty crazy. So you would see that in the machine. That usually doesn't go well with a lot of people. Typically, when we want to rough things, we want to stay as rigid as possible. So that's not quite, for me, it probably wouldn't be an option that I would want to use, even though it's available. Maybe for a different feature that doesn't move as much, but for something like this, it would probably not be ideal. Which comes to the new enhancement in the pocketing option here. We can still take this thought process that we saw in the original and turn it into a 3-axis motion. So in the tool axis control under pocketing now, we have the option to change this from 3 to 5 axis. Previous version, there was literally nothing here, not controllable whatsoever. So now when I run this toolpath, you can see it a lot more rigid because it's only moving in 3 axis. Same thought process, same dynamic motion, just in 3 axis. So if I get down to this bottom portion here and trim it out, you can see here we're walking normal to the face from a 3-axis thought process. So this is kind of cleaning it out, just as almost as good as what it was if it was walking perfectly normal to every single face. This is walking in. And the result you have is something like this. Now this is what I would consider the best of both worlds. You still got to do a little bit of semi-roughing, a little bit of rest roughing there, but not as much as you would if you had this kind of a situation. So it's just another option. I would consider this a preference thought process in there. Which one do you prefer, in that scenario there? Maybe it's worth a try, seeing if this would rough out quicker. You have less to rough out for a semi-finish there. Just another thought process there. So that about covers the 5-axis enhancements. For the next portion here, we're going to be talking about turning. We're going to get into the variable depths. So variable depths is not a new option, but it is now available in here to be able to set it past, I believe it was 25% was the max you were able to go in the past. So a lot of times people wanted it to go more than that. So you can go up to 100% negative or positive now, in whichever way you'd like to. So what variable depths looks like is you start with a tapered type pass here. So that way you're maintaining a different type of contact throughout the insert as it's walking through. And then when you take the next pass, it starts thin and then gets thicker. So it wears down the insert a little bit differently as you go. We have quite a few customers that use this and like it. But now that you're able to maintain a bigger amount of percentage of engagement, you can probably eat a lot more material more efficiently. The next enhancement here in the mill turn side of things is making aggregate head tool locators in our environments are now available. So if I go into this page here for this toolpath, you can see I have myself a 1/2 inch tool set up with what we call an aggregate head. I already have that picked, so I don't have the option to go and grab it anymore. But it's in here. If you right click on the tool when you want to set one up, it's already there. So if I go into my machine setup, you can see under this turret here, if I right click and say view component and all children, I have that aggregate head set up nice and pretty. The nice thing about these heads is that you can adjust them to any angle you want. So how do I know how much to adjust it between each operation? Because not every flat is going to be at this angle. So is that something I have to set up every single time? And the answer is no. When you are setting up these aggregate heads in the environment, you have the ability to choose how the angle behaves. And in this case, I have it set up to say from operation. So right now it's giving me this -15 degree. So every operation I pick, this number will automatically update and change. So just like building any kind of locator, the aggregate options are available in there now. When you go to make any kind of locators, you have the option to select aggregates. So if I run the simulation on this, go ahead and set up my stock here, turn that off, and turn off the housing. We can see our aggregates there nice and pretty. Just going to go ahead and run that pass real quick. We can see here the aggregate working in the way it needs to work. And this is just a simple facing toolpath, nothing too crazy. Just want to show you the actual tool working in progress. The final enhancement that we're going to be talking about in the turning side of things is going to be the B-axis contour turning operations. Now when we watch this toolpath the way it's set up as is, we can see it starts at such a weird, odd angle. It wants to plunge in right there. Then it wants to walk up and over and kind of do its thing. Once it gets to about here, it's not too bad. Then it just walks straight up. But now we have some options in here to make the control a lot, better than what it is at the moment. First option I'll talk about is our stock adjustment. So when I click on the stock adjustment, I have the ability to tell it where the stock actually is and isn't. So you can see right now the reason why it was dipping is because it thinks the stock is only starting right here and then walking up from there. Whereas now I can grab that little green ball and I can move it over like so and say, hey, you know what, the stock starts right there. So now this will be recognized as part of the cutting motion. So when I hit the green check mark and regenerate this toolpath, you can see this starts at a way better situation here. So maybe there's sections of the tool that I don't want it to be touching. As you can see when we get to here, maybe I don't want, when we get to this dip right here, maybe I don't want this particularly trying to make contact on the backside as it's going. So I can set up different portions of the tool that are making contact in here that I don't want to happen. So the next enhancement here is our maximum insert depth. Instead of a particular number, we have this option to manually make the insert shape. So now I can tell Mastercam, hey, you know what? I only want you to use this portion of the tool. So anything in this area here you can make contact with. So if I hit preview, you can see now this portion of the tool is now blue because it's now considered a holder. So if I hit the green check mark and regen, you can see this angle starts a little bit different than it did before. And then when we get over here, it's going to wrap around a little bit differently. So it's not touching that back section. And then over here, it's going to whip a little bit differently there. So it knows it can't use that section. So it'll try and avoid touching that and tip over as necessary for it. The last enhancement inside of B-axis contour is the ability to change our tilting based off of a manual entry, automatic or modified. So in the previous versions we had automatic and manual. So with manual you used to have to draw the tilt lines that you wanted to pick for it to move. Well, now with modified I don't have to deal with any of that. If I turn on modified and I hit the white arrow right here, these are the lines, the tilt lines that are set up for this particular part right now. So if I want to change how this looks, I can click on this guy here and change how this enters in. So I can set up a spot and say, hey, you know what, I want to be, I don't know, 77 degrees from here or something of that sort. Maybe we'll start at an angle like so. And then when I get to here, I can add a different set of tilt lines here. All I got to do is just double click in that spot and I can choose the new location here. So maybe I want to be 70 degrees right there. Then maybe I want to be 70 degrees over here as well. You're seeing this red here because the tool knows the back of the insert is being touched with it. So we can go and readjust that section over here and say, hey, you know what, maybe we have a little bit more room to breathe with that insert there. Oops. Cancel that. So here we can also tell it walk there. I'm going to re-add these 70 degree. And then maybe we can add a different tilt right here. You can see if I walk too far, it's going to hit that spot, so it knows, hey, you can't go that far down. So I'm just going to say, okay, let's go about there. And then maybe right here, we can stay about yay far up. And then we can add that tilt to be about there for now. So from here to here, we'll maintain that. And then we can change. I'll just leave it the way it is right there. But let's say I had an extra one here. I accidentally put that there. All I got to do is click on it and then hit delete on my keyboard. And it's gone. So now when I hit the green check mark, regenerate the toolpath, we can see how the motion behaves. So there's that first angle here that I set up. We'll see the pivot down, in, and then up, and then stays in that motion until we get to the end right here. So now we have the ability to check all that with that modified option. A lot easier than creating those lines and angling them before going into the toolpath. So that about covers it for the B-axis contour and turning and the entirety of my presentation here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Matt, and he'll go ahead and close out the webinar.
And as a reminder, the what'snew.mastercam.com site, it actually redirects to a different link now, but it's still the easiest to type into your browser. That'll always have the full list of everything that's new. We did a slightly pared down version compared to what we did at our in-person rollouts. So if there's anything you feel like you missed, feel free to check that out or reach out to our tech support. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the next webinar.